And good day, everybody. Dave Walker here, co-founder and CEO of the B to SMB Institute. And I promised myself as this year progressed that we would include in our Best to SMB conference a dialogue with people who actually care about our small business customers as much as we do, I think, if not more so. And they are policymakers, they are public advocates, they are the thought leaders basically in shaping our communities, even to a federal level interaction with small business. So I'm excited to bring you these folks, and the first one that I'm actually interviewing in the process of putting this together is Rebecca Melinson. Good day. How are you?
I'm doing fabulous, and thank you so much for having me.
Well, you have started an organization called the Local Business Institute, which I really want to unpack and understand in all of its wonderful dimensions. But first, I really want to get the 411 on you, on how your career progressed and where were the big lessons, the humble beginnings and the big lessons early on that you can kind of point to and reflect on.
Well, it's interesting to reach a point in life where you can look back and see what each segment or each experience actually taught you, and how each piece of it adds into your understanding and your orientation to the world today, especially in business, right? So one of the things is I grew up in New Orleans, and
Okay.
it was a wonderful place to grow up. But what I learned from that is a lot of tolerance, a lot of understanding of different cultures. I grew up in a place where there were so many cultures from all over the world. There was the Italian neighborhood and the Cuban neighborhood, and yes, a predominantly Black neighborhoods, multiple ones.
Mm-hmm.
But while we may have had our differences, as I say, we all came together over the crawfish table. So all differences were set aside, and it provided an interesting sense of community with those variances, which were delightful.
Mm-hmm.
We all knew each other and all got along. So I didn't realize at the time what a strong beginning that was into understanding a multicultural world, but it
Right.
definitely gave me a good basis. I left New Orleans, went to art school in California, um,
Okay.
and then ended up living in the Ozarks very remotely, 10 miles down a dirt road, 40 miles from any town, with an artist, and lived off the land for 10 years. And again,
Wow.
at the time, I never even camped. So this was a whole new experience for me. And we lived without running water for 10 years and without electricity for 2 years. And what I learned from that time, though, was stamina, uh, persistence, uh, determination, which is a nice way of saying I'm stubborn. And I just don't give up, because no one is going to come help you out there, and you have to figure everything out. You have to problem solve. You have to understand how things work in a way that never entered your world before. So I came down out of those mountains with a better sense of my place in the world and the strengths that I had, although I don't think I realized them until I went into business. And then I started really understanding how all of those strengths from those years really played into business. So I went into publishing. I didn't intend to. I was a graphic designer. I had a husband in graduate school and two small children. So I went into publishing and fell in love with it. And I think that was the beginning of my being a localist, although at that time nobody called us localist and we didn't really think about it that way, because it's the symbiotic relationship that a publication has with its community, or should have with its community, I
Mm-hmm.
should say, that you not only reflect that community, but you also lead that community. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's a awesome and sometimes intimidating responsibility, but
Sure.
you can help educate, enlighten, bring understanding, bring community partners together. And as a community publication, I don't know of any other entity that has that kind of capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that early on and just absolutely loved it. So I was in publishing for almost 30 years. Uh,
Wow.
owning 4 publications, I've worked at dailies, weeklies, monthlies, bi-weeklies.
And these are all predominantly around Austin, the Austin area, Texas area?
No, part of this was started in the Ozarks in Arkansas, some in
Okay.
Texas. I've lived around the country. Some of the publications I've owned are, I owned a city magazine. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I owned a couple of statewide newsletters uh,
Mm-hmm.
that were industry specific, one of them
Mm-hmm.
particularly. I co-owned all of this with my partner.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was on politics, government
Mm-hmm.
politics in Austin. And that really seeded me well into understanding the political world and understanding policy. So from those, at the same time I owned one of those, I helped to start. So I founded the Austin Independent Business Alliance.
Okay.
I had an advertiser, Book People, who was at the time the largest independent bookstore in America, came back from a conference and said, hey, these people did this local program, something in Boulder, and it sounds really good. And would
Mm-hmm.
you think we should do it? And so we brought in a couple other people, and the answer was, wow, Austin really needs that. And at the time, there were no independent business alliances really. So
Mm-hmm.
we were truly making it up as we went along. Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
going to do a website and a brochure, and that's all we're promising. Um, but it took off right away. It was a very grassroots effort. And we ended up almost 20 years later, and I was involved for all those 20 years, first as a board member and then as executive director, representing over 1,000 locally owned businesses in Austin.
Wow.
And we've won international economic development awards. My favorite, not award, but my favorite comment is, we have been called the mothership of independent business alliances in the country. And that one just fills me with such warmth
And
because
that is precisely why I wanted to talk to you and I wanted to introduce you to our audience. So
right.
let me ask, I want to ask, I'm dying to ask the question, at what point did you fall in love with small business? Because the characters and qualities that you were describing that you grew up with and that, were really cemented in your time in the Ozarks, and then your entree into publishing, and then your kind of your entree into advocacy, local advocacy on behalf of small business. Was there a point in time when you said, this is what I want to do, this is the service that I want to do? Was there any particular point when that happened?
I think it started with one of my publications in particular, the local magazine, monthly
Mm-hmm.
magazine, because while I had national advertisers, most of my advertisers were small local businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And I really got to know the owners and got to know their concerns and their challenges and who they were. And I was so struck by their passion for what they did
Mm-hmm.
and their struggles with the rest of it because this person who makes this amazing sandwich
Mm-hmm.
can't do a spreadsheet to save their life.
Right.
And this other person who has some other amazing service or product is just absolutely awful at working with employees.
Mm-hmm.
So they struggle with all of these sets of things because they do one thing really well.
Right.
And so that piqued my interest. And then when I had the conversation from Steve Burkew, actually at Book People, about this seems like we need to gather these local businesses together. We had a happy hour at a local bar and we put it in a bunch of local publications and said, if you're an independent business owner and you feel underrepresented and you would like to talk about some kind of organization that speaks to your concerns and your interests, we're having a happy hour at this time. Come talk to us. And we had no idea what would happen. Might just be us talking to ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
We packed the place with about 55 business owners.
Wow.
And blew us away. And they were all they felt like the chamber doesn't speak for them. And in small communities, the chambers of commerce typically do a very good job with their local businesses.
Mm-hmm.
In bigger cities, they typically don't, because they are more focused on bringing big business into the city than nurturing and helping the small businesses who are already existing there.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, if the Chamber of Commerce was really doing its job, we wouldn't have had room to exist. There wouldn't have been a need.
Right.
But those, when we said, well, do y'all want to form an organization? That group said, absolutely yes. And that
Mm-hmm.
was the beginning. And we built it from there. So I think it was the beginning of understanding small business first as advertisers and listening to them and trying
Mm-hmm.
to help them market their businesses, to seeing what was said in this first room that started at a happy hour.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding their needs and their concerns and their passions. And so that's where I really got hooked on small business and local business. I want to change our terminology just a little bit.
Okay.
Nationally, we talk about small business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is defined many different ways. The
Right.
feds define it as under 500 employees.
Mm-hmm.
Some local entities and governments define it as under 100 employees. And the thing about small is it is a definition created by the federal government, and it defines us by the census. And
Mm-hmm.
so we are mostly defined by what we're not what we are.
Mm-hmm.
We're not big,
Mm-hmm.
therefore we're small. It's
Mm-hmm.
derogatory, and I hear it
Diminutive,
used
right?
in a derogatory way so often.
Mm-hmm.
Yet when you look at the numbers, we drive 85% of the job growth.
Mm-hmm.
We employ more than half the people in the country.
Right.
We are the economic cornerstone of all our communities. So
Right.
why don't we get the respect we deserve? So
Right.
I've really been working to change small to local,
Mm-hmm.
because when you talk to business owners, they're proud that they're local.
Mm-hmm.
They're very community oriented. They're very proud of where they are, the needs that they serve, and they're proud of being local. But when you say small, um, you're often treated like, oh, you're small because you're just not big yet. It's like,
Right.
no, no, we're an entity unto ourselves.
I, listen, I've heard it said out. Said I've heard the word said out loud. Small businesses are small for a reason,
Yes.
though they were incapable of being any bigger than they actually are, which is it's just an awful point of view to have. But
It's,
I want to kind of understand you effectively built a product called
Mhm.
the Local Business Institute.
Mhm.
What were some of the features of that product that you knew it had to have to be as successful as it has become? What were you drawing out in a cocktail napkin when you started this?
Well, first, um, our first goal was to look at what would local business that is very small, that is, 20, 30 employees. That's who we originally started focusing on. And the first stage is, what do they need?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I actually have two partners in the Institute. One is Julie Niehoff, and one is Vicky Valdez. Between the three of us, we have more than 90 years experience working with local business.
Mm-hmm.
We have ourselves owned 14 businesses and worked with, we estimated 1.1 million businesses through our careers. So we
Wow.
feel like this put us in a position to understand them. And we decided, first, meet their needs where they are, and then speak their language.
Mm-hmm.
I work with businesses every day who try and navigate a world built for big businesses, with the HR department on the second floor and the marketing department in the other wing, those kind of resources. And here you have a single business owner trying to figure everything out and navigate all that while wearing all of those hats and running a business.
Right.
So how can we help that local business owner?
Mm-hmm.
The second thing we looked at is, I think our, if I may be so bold, is to say our economic system is not working for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It is working for a select few. Frankly, it wasn't working before the pandemic, and the pandemic just split open some of those cracks.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can we build more resilient and sustainable local economies. And that is a huge focus of the Institute. So how do we do that? We have divided the Institute into three parts. One is education, one is policy and research, and then one is economic development. And our goals in economic development are no less than to redefine economic development in this country, to focus more on local communities, local economic systems, and local business. We have too long focused entirely on big business. And it's not to say that one is wrong and one is right, or one is good and one is bad. It's not like that at all. The world needs both. But we need our economic development institutions to focus on both, not just one.
Right. Do you think as you, particularly in your home turf of Austin, does Austin do it right? Or are there municipalities around the country that you kind of, you with your network and your visibility across the country, do you see anybody doing it right?
Not 100%. I see steps in the right direction. One of the programs that the Institute is currently working on, and this sounds simple, but it's never been done, is to do basically a survey and inventory of local policies across the country that are working. It might just be one small policy about, real estate or business ownership, or a relaxation of some other policies. It may be focusing economic development on local business. It can be 1,000 things, but then inventory those, create a toolkit from those. I know when I was director of AIBA, the Austin Independent Business Alliance, a very large part of my job was policy. I spent way too much time at City Hall and in state government. And trying to get them to understand the needs of a small business owner and to recognize the value of those small businesses. With the policy project, if we can inventory those policies that are working and then take those, create a toolkit of all of those that are just almost fill in the blank, your name here, here's a policy that's working in Cincinnati or in California somewhere, or all these different places, then work with local business alliances who many of them want to engage in this kind of work, but they frankly just don't have the wherewithal to do that kind of work by themselves. And they don't need to. We can create a team that goes in and says, let us help you. What are you trying to achieve? What do your businesses need? Here's how you talk to a city council. Here's how you talk to a state legislator. Here's what policy looks like. And then the third stage of that is to bring that into a higher education school. We're looking at the Austin Community College that would house it and teach entrepreneurial students that advocacy role from day one. And it's a 2 or 3 year project, but that's one of the things the Institute is looking at working on because it's so needed. There's no connectivity. There's not enough connectivity. So through education, we've developed the education arm first because it seems to be the greatest need at the moment. And we've looked at what's not being offered. What are business owners not being able to get for themselves and their employees? And how can we fill that gap? And in some cases, it's not reinventing something. It's looking at it at a different angle. It's presenting something that speaks their language. For instance, one of our classes is crisis management, right? Have a prep plan for crisis. Everybody talks about it. Our government does a great job of putting out pamphlets and information on what to do with in a disaster. Well, a disaster is generally looked at as a natural disaster, a flood, fire, things like that. How do you recover from that? But in reality, a local business is much more likely to find themselves embroiled in a disaster of an employee gone berserk on Facebook, or something happening to their owner,
Yeah.
or, those kinds of things are much more likely. So we are looking at helping prepare them for how to deal with those kinds of issues, as well as the floods and tornadoes and earthquakes and things like that.
Right.
So it's speaking their language, it's bringing things to them in a style and format that makes sense to them. Our
Mm-hmm.
classes are about to be all online on demand,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the biggest challenges to a local business is, if I have 3 employees that I want to take this course in
Mm-hmm.
soft skills or whatever they want to offer, the idea that they're supposed to be there at 1 o'clock, but I had 2 other people call in sick and now I can't let them go because I need them on the floor. Well, on demand means don't worry about that 1 o'clock time. You
Mm-hmm.
can take this online at your time frame. If it's
Mm-hmm.
9 o'clock at night, that works too. So that's what I mean by meeting them where they are,
Mm-hmm.
and accommodating where they function, where they live, where their business thrives.
So I want to repeat the kind of the 3 pillars, because and kind of just simplify them in that I get education, and that's principally directed at the small businesses, correct?
Yes.
And then what is the second one again? Is it
The second
advocacy?
one is policy and research.
So really just trying to understand. What an incredible idea to inventory and then warehouse and create a hub for a knowledge base of policies around the country that are working.
Mhm.
And then the third piece is again what?
The third piece is economic development.
Got it. And then
And
is that really come in the form of working with local economic development initiatives? I mean, every city, every county in the U.S. has some bank of funds that is either funded through taxes or licenses or things like that. Is that what you're trying to tap into? Are you spending a lot of your time educating the people who disperse the money so that they know how to really use it in the right way?
we're doing all of the above.
Okay.
So it's part creating those policies, helping local entities to better understand how to serve the local businesses, better understand what it takes in their community. Every community has what are called community assets. It's not just about a straight line from business to government.
Mm-hmm.
It's neighborhood associations, it's community reinvestment organizations, sometimes it's churches, it's
Mm-hmm.
all the community players come to the table, because the reality is that local business is them.
Mm-hmm.
Local business is people, for people, by people, serving the needs of people.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy to think of giant corporations as some other kind of entity, and in a way they are.
Mm-hmm.
But local business is not. It's your neighbors. It's
Right.
they're all trying to understand what you need so they can provide it.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives a whole community, I think, a stake in having a healthy local business, thriving community right there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's working with all the players involved. It crosses over into policy because we can recommend policies when we get the policy project done.
Mm-hmm.
It crosses over into education. Those 3 things are all very closely linked.
And how did those three things, I don't want to necessarily say change, but what was the impact of the pandemic on LBI and your mission and your 3 pillars and your deliverables to your communities?
Okay, this is going to be the shock answer for you.
Okay.
LBI is 4 months old.
Wow. Okay. So
Uh,
built on, 1,000 years worth of combined experience in
yes.
creating these different aspects of what LBI is, but really finally bringing it all together and making it an entity of its own. So, is Austin really the primary chapter of LBI at this point, or are there other municipalities where
It's the
there's?
first chapter.
Pardon
Uh,
me.
it's the first chapter.
Okay.
So we're working not as much locally, except through Austin Community College,
Mm-hmm.
but we're working statewide, and the state government has totally embraced what we're doing and are
Mm-hmm.
very excited about the kinds of things we're bringing to the table and how we're doing them. I,
Mm-hmm.
I frankly, I have to say, we've talked about the Local Business Institute for several years, and it was me leaving AIBA, one of my partners retiring. She ran the City of Austin Economic Development Small Business Program.
Mm-hmm.
And to make this really happen, because we've been talking about it a long time. But looking at where things are now, I don't think we would have reached the kind of success we've reached in such a short time before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new, everyone is, I guess, assessing their values on just an
Mm-hmm.
individual level and a community level. I think this country's, well, we've never had a timeout like this before.
Right.
Awful as it is, it's a reset button.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's going to offer us opportunities that we would not have had otherwise. And they are opportunities to rethink how things are done. You know, when everything's going along and it's seemingly working fine,
Mm-hmm.
you don't throw a wrench in it and say, let's rethink all this. But when it crashes and it's not working, is the time that you come in and say, okay, well, maybe things weren't perfect before. So how do we pull local communities out from the ashes of COVID and make them stronger, more resilient, better, and more inclusive, better for everyone?
You know,
So,
I think a number of our major brand members, you know, were probably on a parallel path because, and I think many of the leaders that are part of our institute would admit with not a great deal of pride, they would admit that up until this year, they really never thought they needed to have a public small business advocacy arm or effort. They didn't feel like they needed a foundation. They didn't feel like they needed grants. They didn't feel like they really needed to give back to this massive base of millions of customers. And you know, COVID gave everybody religion on that and basically said, no, no, this is a critical part now of our function as stakeholders, tremendously invested stakeholders in the health and success of small businesses. We have to help them. So I guess my question to you is, you know who our members are, who our audience is. How can they help you? You given this pulpit, what can large enterprises do to help you in this effort?
well, first they can help small business,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me, local business, right? Correcting
Right.
myself. Um, and it's nurturing and growing your customer base in reality, is what that is. Because I think before the pandemic, there are so many local businesses, you could never envision them going away.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fountain that just continues. And the Texas Restaurant Association is now saying that they anticipate in a year 80% of the independent restaurants in Texas will be closed.
Mm.
That's unimaginable. I mean, we could never have imagined that. So why create policies and programs to deal with something you could have never imagined? But now it's here. And
Mm-hmm.
the more thriving, the more local businesses we have, the more customers big business has,
Mm-hmm.
because all these local businesses use products and services from big companies. They're
Mm-hmm.
essential. You need them.
Mm-hmm.
And big business needs local business.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this great symbiotic relationship that sometimes gets a little tilted one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But the way we can help build that back is look for ways, listen to them, learn to speak their language.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, they had to come to you because you had a product or service that they couldn't get anywhere else. Now, help them where they are. So listen, provide rethink services or plans or offerings that you might not have thought of in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and invest in communities. It is a very it's like ecological system of business that
Yeah,
every
absolutely.
part of it has to be healthy for
Hmm.
any part of it to really be healthy.
Right.
What's happening now is not sustainable. It
Hmm.
really wasn't sustainable before, and now we know that. So
Hmm.
let's rebuild it where all parts of it are sustainable. And if I can put in a little bit of pitch for my institute,
Hmm.
it
Please do.
we are new. We are a 501c3.
Hmm.
We are looking for funding for our programs. Invest in us, and that helps us help business and help communities across the country.
I
So
think it's a very, very fair ask. And as I think, uh, as I've been in many conversations with leaders around our B2 SMB ecosystem, um, I hear uh, not just a willingness, but a strong passion for directing assistance to small businesses.
mhm,
Many leaders for the first time really articulating it. We've got to do something, but there's no playbook. There's no real direction, and it doesn't help when it feels like all assistance, particularly policy related assistance, seems to reside in whatever the status of the next round of PPP is.
right.
And yet, as you really kind of scan the web, you see all of these extraordinary local initiatives
Mhm,
helping local businesses.
mhm.
And I think if we can figure out a way to help you to really consolidate those into a central informational hub, it would be of enormous assistance to the policymakers, those who want to lend help,
Mhm.
those small businesses, to other advocacy groups that exist out there. So I really hope that we can bang the drum here by introducing you and really advance the cause of the terrific work that you're doing. It's just really cool.
Well, thank you. And I also sit on the board of the American Independent Business Alliance. It's the national umbrella organization for all of the local independent business alliances. And we're looking to work with them and create something called the Amoeba Academy.
Okay.
That a part of that will be the institute does the programming, but the academy resides with Amoeba. And part of that are some of the offerings we're already producing, but part of it is helping local leaders understand the dynamics of their communities. So helping to build more independent business alliances. It's a movement that's growing. That how can we help enable more people to organize in their communities so they have a voice and they can help their local businesses.
Hmm.
It's not about writing a check to a local business, although I would say the holiday season is coming up, buy
Right.
all your gifts locally. Um, but how can we create the infrastructure that provides the assistance that all the other helpers need? And
Right.
that's the level where we're working. So that affiliation with Amoeba is the only national organization that has that kind of grassroots, boots on the ground affiliations of thousands and thousands and thousands of local businesses. And I will say there are lots of organizations that have email lists or spreadsheets and names. But what this does is these are trusted relationships, and
Hmm.
business is about relationships. And
Hmm.
I know, having run one for 20 years, when I tell my members that this is a good idea or look at this new product, they know that I've researched it and it's an endorsement and they trust me.
Hmm.
That's very different than getting an email from someone you've never met.
Right.
So
Exactly.
we're looking to amplify what Amoeba's already doing and help these local leaders really do a terrific job in all their communities.
Well, I'm excited, and thank you for the introduction to Derek Peebles. Excuse me, it's not COVID, I swear. Um, we're going to be interviewing Derek Peebles, who's the relatively new executive director of the American Independent Business Association, Amoeba, in case you didn't get it, AMIBA, and excited to hear his perspective and point of view on being an advocate for small business. So I
Good.
can't thank you enough for doing this, Rebecca. It
Oh,
was
No.
incredibly helpful. Thrilled to introduce you. I think that you bring an important new voice into the Institute and to our members. You don't mind if we provide your contact information?
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Please do.
we'll
Please do.
absolutely do that. And the website is localbusinessinstitute.org.
Yes.
So not hard to remember. And again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you bringing your story to all of us here.
Well, thank you so much. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate being given this stage for this time. I really, really do. There's no reason why we all shouldn't be working together. And this is
Agreed.
a great step going in that direction. So
Agreed.
thanks.
It absolutely is. Thanks so much.
My
Take care.
pleasure. Bye-bye.